So welcome to Texas AEL Manager Monday, 12 overlooked practices great leaders develop that poor leaders don't. Today, our presenter is Dr. Rick Alvarado, and I will share a little bit more about Dr. Alvarado in just a moment. My name is Olga Escamilla, and I'm your host. And I also have Wayne Crandall. He's our co-host or our technical support. And I also have Dr. Deborah Hargrove. She's going to be assisting also. So welcome. At this time, it is my honor to welcome our presenter, Dr. Rick Alvarado. And I say it is my honor because I have known Dr. Alvarado for many years. He was our associate director at Education Service Center Region 20. He has served as an educator for 38 years, and he retired in August of 2020. He has served as a teacher, assistant principal, assistant superintendent, interim superintendent, human resource administrator, and as the executive director of Education Service Center 2 in Corpus Christi. Dr. Alvarado has a passion for training and has trained superintendents, board members, leadership teams, and teachers. He's certified to train in the 7 Habits and Lone Star Governance and evaluating and improving student outcomes and True Colors. He is also an executive coach and helps his clients reach their fullest potential. So in his free time, he enjoys reading, learning about effective leadership and the impact on organizations. So welcome, Dr. Alvarado. It's an honor to have you. And we're so glad that you are here to share and impart your knowledge upon us here in Adult Ed. So thank you.
Thank you, Olga. And so again, I want to express my gratitude to each of you for being present today, because we all know that one of the tenets for effective leadership is constantly feeding our own skill set and our own minds. And so thank you so much. So today we're going to talk about the 12 often overlooked practices great leaders develop that poor leaders don't. So the objectives for today are going to be 3. We're going to identify practices and the qualities that separate great leaders from poor leaders. We're also going to talk about identifying practices and or qualities that you possess that you have to enhance to make you a better leader. And the third thing we're going to talk about is identify what attitudes you need to change or adjust to become a better leader. What does it mean when they use the tool of reflection? Well, as you think about that question, I believe in the power of reflection, because I think that is, as great as leaders, that's one of the ways in which we can navigate whether we are being successful or not being successful in what we're doing. And so the power of reflection allows us to ask ourselves 3 questions. And the questions I like for us to ask each other or ourselves is, what went well during that project and or activity? What didn't go so well during that project and or activity? And what will I do differently next time with a similar project and or activity? So why do you think those 3 questions may help guide us as we continue to enhance our leadership skills?
Okay, Rick, we had some answers come in about reflection, and someone said careful consideration and actively assessing and making corrections, revisions, etc. as you go. We had someone say think before talking or acting. We also have someone sharing saying thinking of goals and practices. They find ways to reflect on what went well and what did not. We had someone say time to understand themselves and others. And another comment says learning from what works and what does not work. Consider my impact on others. And then others look at what they are doing to be successful. There's a lot of comments coming in to help understand the why in order to determine how to go to where and when. So a lot of great responses. There's so many more.
Yes, thank you very much for contributing to the conversation, because those are all qualities that we should all possess and do on a regular basis. The other thing I'd like to add for your consideration is, if you journal, congratulations. And if you don't journal, I'd like for you to consider journaling, because what I like to do is whenever I am reflecting on something, I can do it mentally, and that may be okay for me for a while, but then on those really important hot topics or those things that are critically important to the organization and to what's happening, is I journal and I do a scaling piece. So what happens is I ask myself on a scale from 1 to 10, how did I perform on that particular activity? So 1 being not so good, 10 being all, right on target. Because what happens is next time that happens, for example, let's say I give myself a 6. So that's just above mediocre, right? So that means I have some things that I need to work on. But if I don't write it down, for me, it's out of sight, out of mind. But when I write it down, it causes me to go in the next event that we have, and I do a scaling event. If I say I want to get better to a 8 the next time, I can go back and say, okay, so the last time my baseline was a 6, and now I'm an 8, so I'm going in the right direction. So on the reverse side, if my baseline was a 6 and now I'm a 4, I have to critically think about, so what am I doing differently that's not serving the purpose I wanted to serve? And how do I have to change my mindset so that it serves a better purpose? So the journey really helps you because there's a documented tool for yourself that helps guide you in that conversation. Have you ever wondered whether you're developing the practices and qualities of great leadership? So what are those wonders about? What wonders do you have? And that's why the reflection tool comes in hand with this particular question, because we have to have some kind of measurement as leaders to build upon. So if we know that we are lacking a skill set, is what are we doing to enhance that skill set? So yeah, I think all of us, wonder about, are we developing the qualities and quantities of great leadership, not only for ourselves, but most importantly for those that we lead. So what do you think separates great leaders from not so great leaders?
How much you're willing to listen. Larissa says the growth mindset. Arturo says lack of action. Elena says habits. Minerva says leading by example. Deborah says passion and communication. Desmond says effective communication. Mary Jo says reflection. Wayne says awareness. Hillary says listening and communication. Larissa says humility. Oh, I like that. Giselle says communication and lead by example. Tiffany says confidence. Carla says it's not about you, but the team. Listening and empathy, says Sarah. Maria says an attitude of service. Oh, Yvette says communication and flexibility. Diana says effective communication. Frida says empathy. Elena says taking action. Kelly says proactive and not reactive. Larissa says understanding your communication system and how to navigate it. And Giselle says, I wear a bracelet that says that very thing, lead by example. Oh, I like that. And Betsy says acknowledgement, consistency, integrity, being impartial.
So I think that your comments add to the body of research out there that says what great leaders possess. And we will talk about a lot of those things that you all mentioned. So you all can contribute to this. So what the article, the book says was that there are many things that great leaders possess, but we're going to talk about briefly, of course, 12 overlooked practices that stand out as often missed qualities and characteristics of best leaders. And guess what? None of them are generic. They mostly consist of attitudes and disciplines. And some of you in your comments talked about, it's my attitude as a leader that determines the altitude that we achieve. And it's also the discipline. And what that infers is that, what practices do I put in place? And am I consistent with those practices? Or is my leadership so unstable that sometimes it's difficult for the people that I lead to understand where I'm coming from? And then some of you on the chat said, change your attitude and gain some discipline, because you can become a far better leader too if we work on, first of all, knowing what my attitude is, not only based on my perspective, but on the perspective of what employees think my attitude is. And then the discipline is, what do I have to do differently to continue to grow as a leader? So here's another reflection piece. So think of a leader that you hold in high regard. Have that name in your head. Think of a leader that you hold in high regard. So what practices or qualities do they possess that makes them a great leader? Honesty. Yes, definitely. Because if you're not honest with yourself and your employees, it's tough to lead.
We have listening before deciding, investing in people. Hillary says she would never ask someone to do something that she was not willing to do herself. Then we have integrity, humility. They care about their employees, honesty, truthfulness, transparent. We have a couple of transparents, more transparency, active listening, empathy, trust, respect, works harder than anyone, reliable, and follow through, compassionate, ethical, integrity, not afraid to do something that they wouldn't do themselves, hands on, shares their enthusiasm for learning, perspective taking, work harder than anyone else, impartial and balanced, transparent, and taking a role of mentorship. They're willing to roll their sleeves up and do the work too, from sweeping the floor to helping students one-on-one, and then celebrate inclusivity and equality.
I love it. I love it because what happens, what it's telling me is that you all have great mentors. And we all know that in order to be successful as leaders, we have to have a great mentor because it's tough. You all deal with a lot of issues, personnel issues, accountability issues. And it's important that you rely on those mentors and some of the skill sets, and then see where you are against those skill sets. So now I'd like for you to think about a leader that you feel does not model and or practice great leadership skills. Think of that person. Don't name them, but just think of that person because we may know them. Think of a leader that you feel does not model and or practice great leadership skills. What are some of the characteristics that they exhibit?
No communication organization, blames others for failures, not willing to learn new things, micromanage, self-centered, says supportive things but doesn't show them. Negativity, self-centered, lies, prideful, inconsistent, lack of productivity, micromanaging, a lot of micromanaging, talks but no walk, always planning to do something, blames others for their own failures, arrogant, has favorites, uses shame and guilt to leverage people, poor communication, closed-minded, passive-aggressive, self-centered, addresses issues indirectly, controller, selfish, passive-aggressive, never acknowledges good qualities of other employees.
All great comments, because what we know is that we can use that knowledge to rate ourselves again. So when we're interacting with people and we're using the reflection tool, is we know what great leaders' qualities they have, and we've also identified some qualities that not so great leaders have. And so as you reflect, is ask yourself, so did I express the great quality leadership, or did I express some of the qualities that I personally think are not so great leaders exhibit? So that's also another tool that I highly recommend that you all use after you are interacting with staff. So let's talk about the 12 overlooked practices. And you're going to find that these are pretty basic, but sometimes what happens is we may forget about those things. And what we know about ourselves is that we base ourselves on habits. A lot of us base ourselves on habits. What works for us consistently, we do over and over again. But sometimes when we're under stress, we revert back to those habits that perhaps have not been successful for us. So we're going to take a look at some of these habits, because what do we know about habits? They're either patterned habits or purposeful habits, right? So what do I mean by patterned habits? What do you think I mean by patterned habits? They are comfortable. Sometimes they're good or bad, right? Sometimes patterns we say are good and sometimes we say are bad. And the example I like to give is like breathing. Is that a good pattern or a bad pattern? That's probably a good pattern, right? Because we don't consciously think about breathing, we just happen to breathe. However, how many of you have left work and went home, and then you just kind of zoned out, and then you just realize you're pulling up in the driveway? Has that ever happened to you? For a lot of us, all the time, right? So it's about, okay, so was that a good habit, a patterned habit, or a purposeful habit? It depends, right? If you didn't kill anyone on the way home, then it's a good habit. But if you pass a red light or cause an accident, maybe that's not a very good pattern. So it's really about taking an internal reflective look at our own patterns, because what happens under stress, we exhibit either habits that are patterned or habits that are purposeful. So the first one talks about that great leaders have this amazing way of taking the complex to the simplest form. And that's not easy to do. What the author talked about here was that, if I, as the leader, am going to ask my staff or the staff that I lead to do something, I, as the leader, have to totally understand what the task is. Because if I'm foggy in my head or I'm not totally understanding what's expected of this ask from whoever's asking it for us, how can I articulate that task to the staff that I need, that I have to follow it? So it doesn't mean that you dumb down the task. What it does mean is that the author says you make the concept accessible. And the definition of accessible for this author was that you break it down to the simplest terms. How many times have you all been in a meeting and you're asked to do something and you walk away and you're like, I'm not sure what they asked me to do? As a leader, it's important that you're able to break it down so that when people walk away, they know exactly what's expected of them. And the other thing that this author talked about, when you're going to give a talk or a speech about a concept, is have an elevator speech. Because if you can break it down to 30 seconds or less, then it's probably pretty clear in your head. If you can't break it down to 30 seconds or less, you might want to go back and talk about and think about, okay, so how can I make it clear? Because I'm still confused. So if I'm confused, guess what? When I'm delivering this message, they're going to be confused. So if you don't understand it, no one else will understand it clearly enough to follow it either. Make sense? So take complex matters and try to make them as simple as possible. The second one, this one is fight for clarity. And this one is really hard sometimes because, I know that in adult ed, we have a lot of accountability and we are responsible for making sure that we are out there, making sure that we have our resources available to those in need. So in leadership, we know that confusion reigns until someone makes things clear. Clarity is what great leaders bring to the table. So what I like to do in meetings is when someone says that, is reflect back in their words what they said. Because if I can reflect back in their words, they're either going to say, yes, exactly, or no, that's not what I meant. So if I'm hearing a lot of the times when I'm reflecting back in their words, no, that's not what I meant, I have to work on making sure that I'm really using purposeful listening. Because what we find out about listening is that sometimes we listen, and my term is to one up the other person or to counter their point, as opposed to listening to understand what they're saying. So that clarity of purpose is really important for leaders. So, one of the ways that the author suggests that we do this is to ask a lot of questions. So when we're having conversations with our staff, and I as a leader, I'm not clear, is ask questions, not for the sake of just for asking questions, but for clarity. And then sometimes what happens, especially if it's a very complex issue that we have to deal with, sometimes it's best to, let's stop here, let's take a break and come back. Because when we change our perspective, when we get up, when we walk around the room or walk outside, we get this new sense of energy. So sometimes is when we're in the heat of it, is stepping away from it and then come back. The author suggests, days a week, but I know that you all know in adult ed, sometimes we don't have those things because we have to put some structures in place to ensure that we're meeting all of the targets. And then, what the author suggests is that clarity emerges out of a process. Clarity doesn't happen out of happenstance. It may, but it rarely happens that way. It really happens because everyone around the table that's involved in that conversation is fully engaged in that conversation to make the best happen of that. So you have to, they say fight for it, but you really have to work through some things to make sure you get that clarity. Great leaders make it a habit of making sure they take the time, especially if it's an important decision that they have to make. Because we all know as leaders, we can ill afford to rush through to make a decision and then realize that, that wasn't the best decision. Because what I know about people is that typically especially when we're in a complex issue that we're talking about, typically the first, viable opportunity or the first viable chance of that being successful is the one that most people go with. And I always encourage it. When I was at Region 2 and at Region 20, I always encourage to, okay, that's one possibility of how we address this issue. Okay, let's think of another opportunity. What's another way we can address this issue that will work? So we have a conversation, because what I have found is usually it's the third conversation that we're asking people to think about it. That's the most viable, that's going to be the most successful. But yes, time takes, we're always rushed with some things, but there are some things that you just cannot rush because it's not in the greater good at the end of the day. So take the time, because I know sometimes people get frustrated with the time because they just want the marching orders. Just tell me what to do, let me go do it. But are we here to lead them and guide them through the conversation for self-growth, or are we here to just tell them what to do? And I would venture to say that it's the first one, that we're here to, as leaders, it's our responsibility to grow other leaders. And so if we can help them make better decisions, we all benefit from that. So the next one is, you can make excuses or you can make progress, but you can't do both. Because if we rush to make a decision, we're going to have to clean it up at the end probably. And it's going to take us more time to clean up what we did, the decision we made, than taking the time up front to really think through what's the best possible way to address whatever this is. So I really love this one. Think of abundance, because there's two mindsets. One of them is the abundance mindset and the scarcity mindset. What do you think scarcity mindset is about?
Never enough.
Yes, Elena, it's so true. Yeah. All too often, doing as little as possible to get by. Yeah.
People or money options, no limitations, maybe. We don't have the budget. Always thinking that we can't, as the first response, there's not enough to go around. That's not going to work. Maybe closed-minded. I don't know how that will work, maybe.
Yes, I
There's a
love
lot
these
coming in.
responses, because, if we come from a deficit mindset, guess what we get? We get the deficit mindset, right? We don't look at opportunities. And then as leaders, we can't come to meetings and to staff and have the scarcity mindset, because what happens is we model for them what we're modeling for them. And all the things you mentioned is that talking about that scarcity mindset. The abundance mindset is the reverse. It's that there is enough for all of us to accomplish what we need to accomplish. And I know that in adult ed especially, is that, sometimes I know that we have to reach out to our community partners to be able to help us to get people to come to our program, just to make the awareness piece. So if I come from the mindset, when an employee comes to me and says, well, I tried all those things. Okay, so tell me what you tried. And they talk to me about they tried. Okay, so what else can you think of that you can try? Because it's in that power of questioning that we help people grow. It's not that we question their ability. It's just that we push them a little bit. We nudge them a little bit, if you will, to think differently about what they're doing. And I have found that when we ask the power of question, they come up with some amazing resources and responses. So moving forward, I hope that you're coming from a place of abundance as opposed to a place of scarcity. This one, regularly sift through key priorities. This is one area where I think a lot of leaders struggle in, because we all set goals for ourselves and for our organization and for our program, and that's a great thing. However, sometimes we get too rigid in our goals, and that doesn't help the organization and our program move forward. So goals are supposed to be where we have some, what I call growth progress measures. And so we set our goal, and then we put some structures in place on how we're going to monitor that goal. And all too often we set the goal, but we don't put that monitoring piece in place. And I think that's so critical for us as leaders, is to place those monitoring systems in place. So for example, 2 months from now, we're going to check on whether our program is meeting the numbers, these numbers here for this area. And then we're going to check again, because what happens is we can't wait till the end to realize, well, that strategy didn't work. That was not a very good goal. So it's really about putting some structures in place and then sharing all of those goal progress measures with others, and then having a conversation with our staff about, so how do we meet these goal progress measures? If I'm giving a lot of time and energy to one thing, guess what's happening to probably the other things on my table? all of us kind of fall into that place about, we set and forget. And, so we got to change our mindset about, okay, so I know that's an opportunity for me. So what am I going to do differently next time? So it's a great journaling opportunity for scaling to go from 1 to 10. So, okay, so, this time, where did I fall? A 4. So how am I going to get to a 6 the next time? And so what this author suggested was that every 3 to 6 months, you rethink your goals. Look at them. Are they still meeting the standard that we want to stand? And I know that the idea is not to change goals every 4 minutes. But the idea is you may not change the goal, but you may change the goal progress measure, the strategy you're using to attain that goal, and letting staff be part of that conversation, because we all know that if we don't involve our staff in coming up with a plan, it's probably not going to be a very effective plan. So we have to involve our staff all along the process. The other thing that I found really important in this conversation from the author was that great leaders think won't, not can't. Because, when we all do that self-talk, if we're honest with ourselves, and I think that self-talk, if we're doing that self-talk, if we're saying disparaging comments about ourselves, or I did a terrible job with that, I'm not good at this, or that's not, math is not my strength, or looking at those numbers, those charts, I don't get that. Guess what? If you tell yourself that enough times, guess what? You're right. But if you tell yourself, you know what? I don't understand that, but who on the staff, can help me find clarity around what that means? And when you do that, you're going to honor the person you're going to, because they're going to feel really honored that you're taking the time to go ask them to help kind of tutor you, if you will. So what the author suggests here that instead of saying I can't to yourself, is saying I won't. Because the I won't is a choice that I make. So for example, if I'm out in a group, in a community meeting, and I know that they want me to do some things, to participate in this activity and do some things on behalf of the organization that are not aligned to the program goals of the AEL program, then the message should not be, I can't do that. It's, I won't do that, because you have a choice. While that might seem like a small difference in self-talk, it's the difference between people who let life happen to them and people who make life happen to them. What does that mean? People who let life happen to them and people who make life happen. What do you think that means?
Not in charge of yourself or decisions. Hillary says people who let life happen don't realize they're making themselves victims of circumstance.
Yes, I love that,
Yeah.
because we become vulnerable to the environment or to the experience, as opposed to making a difference in that environment or that experience. Awesome. When should one use the tool of reflection in their work? And you have the 4 choices: at least once a day, only when dealing with difficult tasks, only when disciplining an employee, and as many times as necessary to help them get clarity. It's as many times as necessary to help you get clarity around whatever issue you were talking about. All too often, I'm guilty of this too. All too often, we go from this event to that event, to that event, to that event, just because that's the way our schedule sometimes happens. However, moving forward, I would highly encourage you, between meetings, maybe give yourself 10 to 15 minutes to reflect after each meeting and say, what did I do well? Did I interact well in that conversation? Not so well? Or what can I do different next time? So that power reflection. So it's as many times as possible during the day to help you get clarity. But I also encourage you not to stack up your meetings back to back, so that you have some time. And later on in the 12 strategies that we're going to talk about, it talks about that self-care. So the 7th one is master self-discipline. So self-discipline is simply taking responsibility for your own actions, health, attitudes, schedule, words, mistakes, and decisions. How many of you have been in a meeting and your leader didn't take responsibility for something that we all know he or she should have taken responsibility for? I think we all have been in that situation, right? So let's not fall into that trap as leaders. Don't allow yourself to not take responsibility for an action or decision you made because, trust is really hard to gain from others, but so easy to just let it go. So take responsibility when you need to take responsibility. The help piece talks about, how are we taking care of our physical, mental, and emotional health? Because I know that your jobs are not easy jobs. There is constant stress. So how are you taking care of yourself? Don't let that happen by happenstance. Be purposeful, be disciplined about the decisions that you make. And as leader, it's hard to do that, but you will find that if you take that time, you will be far better for yourself and most importantly for your employees and the program. And the other thing is the words. As leaders, we have to be conscientious of the word choice that we use. We have to be really careful how we use our words, because once they have left our mouth and been interpreted by someone else, and it's negative, it doesn't matter how many sorries I say to the person, the damage is done. So really be conscientious about the word choice that I'm choosing to use in any given situation. And by not doing this makes us irresponsible, because our organizations places as leaders because they know what we have the capabilities to lead people. And so we want to lead people with dignity, respect as well. Read those comments, please.
Mr. Martinez says, fess up when I mess up. Larissa said she had a leader who gaslighted them. And then Gabriela says, what leaders say impacts the teamwork for good or bad. Then it's relevant to realize that leaders have to be conscious of what they feel and projecting to others. And I had made a comment that back in the day, I had a leader who would make decisions and then that person would forget, and then we'd get in trouble for things. And Luis says that's why he writes things down. Thank you, Luis, for that. And then Armando says, reflecting at the end of the day is valuable. Indeed, the sun comes out the following day, new hope and a day to apply from new reflections on the day before. Very good. And Deborah said she had a leader who wouldn't stick up for her on an issue, all the while knowing she was not to blame for something.
And all of you are right. As leaders, we're bound to not to hit the target many times because no one is perfect. It's how you react to not hitting the target that's so important. And that's why that reflection piece is so important. Don't knock yourself over the head constantly. Learn from that, and then move forward and try not to make that same error again, because that's what great leaders do, is they learn from their mistakes, do something, put the practices differently in place, and then move on from that. But don't beat yourself up. Number 8, think we, not me. I think all of us, truly understand this concept. Otherwise, you wouldn't be on this call today. That Jim Collins stated, and it was famously demonstrated, that the greatest leaders in the corporate world are humble. I would venture to say that great leaders in general, in whatever line of work they're humble. They're determined, but they're not selfish. And I think what he means by that is that we all have expectations of ourselves, and the organization has expectations of us. But it's not that we will do whatever possible to get there, regardless of who we step on. It's about being determined, yet being conscientious that we deal with the human element. And when we deal with the human element, we have to be aware when we're talking to other folks is where their perspective is, where are they coming from? And we have to be conscientious to listen with respect before responding to whatever it is that they're saying, especially if it's contrary to what my belief is on that particular topic. And so I love the third bullet here, where it says, where the author says, they believe in a cause greater than themselves and serve the organization or the cause they are part of. They don't expect it to serve them. And I think we all had leaders that expected everyone in the organization to serve them, and that's not the idea here. The idea is what am I as an individual, in this case, the leader, doing to serve the organization and the people that I serve? Because it's not about them serving me, it's about me serving them, because that's a true servant leader. And I think in AEL, we attract people who are really about servant leader, because we want to make sure we have a program that looks for individuals who are in need of our program, but also once they're in our program, we do everything possible to make sure we keep them in our program because we know that they want to accomplish things in their life for themselves and for their family. Decide to work for their employees. And this is kind of goes along with the other one, is that the greatest bosses realize that their employees don't work for them, they work for their employees. If you show up to work on a regular basis on a how can I serve you attitude, you will gain the respect from all of your employees and they will do whatever possible they have to do to make sure that you and the organization is successful. Think about the last interaction you had with a group of people in your program. Did you show up with the mentality of how can I serve you? Or did you have the intention of how can they serve me as a leader? But I know what I know about good people like you all is you all show up as how can I serve you? How can I make your work and your life better? What resources do you need to be successful? Get started early. This author suggests that you set your alarm. If you typically get up at 6, maybe set up your alarm for 5:30 or 5 o'clock and take some time to meditate for that self-care. Take some time to meditate or take a walk around the block or center yourself. If you haven't used the centering activity, it's really a great way to, especially under stress, to kind of get you back into your true self, your truest self, that calm self. So center yourself and reflect on your day. This also suggested that early risers do better in life, but I also know that some people are morning people and some people are evening people. So find that happy medium for yourself. And then the healthier you are, the more productive you become. Because if you're not feeling good, what you may be portraying in your meetings with staff. So be conscientious of that. And then, get a jump on your day and you get a jump on your leadership in life. Arrive on time. I love this one. And when I was leading different organizations, I learned from my mentor, and he always told me, Rick, if the meeting is at 1 o'clock and you show up at 1 o'clock, you are late. And at first I struggled with that. I said, what do you mean? But you started at 1 o'clock. I got there on time. But it's a mindset shift because the message you're saying to staff or the people in the meeting is that, wow, if the meeting starts at 1, I don't expect you to be here at 1, because if we get there at 1, what are we doing? We're getting our coffee, we're getting our water, we're getting getting our seating, getting our materials together. He said, always arrive 10 to 15 minutes early. I get there 30 minutes early because what I'm telling, the message I'm sending to staff indirectly is that I need to be ready. So when you arrive, I am ready to meet your needs. It's really important that you don't arrive on time, but you arrive early so that you begin to send the message. And you will soon notice that the people that are attending the meeting will also start getting early, because we want to make sure that every time we meet, we spend that time together in the most fruitful way.
Thelma says she was always taught that 15 minutes early is on time and otherwise on time is late. And Sarah says the worst part about overscheduling herself, because I guess she overschedules, it's that it makes her late way too much. Wayne says ready to start at 1, not arrive at 1.
Yeah, and this one I think, we really, all of us need to really take this to heart, is practice self-care. Because what I know about highly committed individuals like you all, I think this goes on the back burner. What we know about great leadership is they take time off. They don't work 24/7 because they know the value of self-care. Because you can work yourself into the grave if you don't take care of your self-care. And you also have to take care of your personal relationships, because if you're at work all the time, guess what you're not doing at home? You're not taking care of the things that are important to you at home either. So don't fall into the trap of working 24/7, because life can't go without you. Do something different so that life does still happen, even though you're not there. Self-care is so important. And great leaders also realize that they have limits, and then they respect them. If they know that they've been working all week and they've been doing late hours, because I know that you all go visit your programs, and a lot of the times the programs take place in the evenings. And yes, I know it's important for staff to see you there, but you also have to it's important to take care of yourself and manage your time wisely. And then the third bullet says, every leader will either practice self-care or you revert to self-medication. And I hope that you don't revert to self-medication, because I don't think that's the answer to be a great leader. I think that if you take care of yourself, you will take care of the program and the people in the program. There's some times where you probably notice yourself where you're running yourself ragged and you're really tired and you're running on empty. And when you're running on empty, can you make the best decisions? Are you going to meetings in your best self? I don't know. Maybe, maybe not. I would venture to say that if you're running on empty, I'm not sure you're good for yourself and or for the program. So please don't self-medicate. It's important that we as leaders do not forget that we have the responsibility to take care of those that we lead, and we have to take that responsibility seriously. You know what their work schedule is. So sometimes you have to ask them to leave because they're just so committed. So obviously y'all are great leaders. So reflections, what would you add to this list of 12 characteristics of great leaders? What would you all add? We're not perfect and we're not. And we should never, project that we're perfect, because that's not what great leaders do.
Knowing when to step back and let things happen, sense of humor, and you don't know everything.
When we make a mistake, laugh at ourselves, because that gives permission to bring some levity to the group.
Leaders don't have all the answers. Keep motivating all team members to do the same and sharing knowledge, realistic assessments of boundaries, knowing how to have hard conversations. We need to acknowledge our mistakes, correct them, and learn to forgive ourselves. And then Kelly says, give yourself grace and also others.
Don't be so hard on yourself. So as you heard about these 12 characteristics and the feedback from your colleagues here, so what practices and or qualities do you need to enhance? So I hope this is a reflective question for you when you leave this session today is, think of your skill set. What are you doing really well? Where's some opportunities for growth? And how will you put some structures in place to make those things happen for yourself? Here are the references that we came from, Carrie Newhoff and Jim Collins. Well, I know that we're above the time there, but thank you for the opportunity to spend some time with you all and learning from you all, because I know the wonderful work that you all do. I am so grateful for your commitment to the AEL program. I strongly believe in the AEL program. I've been involved in the AEL program at several regional service centers. And so I applaud you for the work and the commitment that you bring to the organization, but most important, to the people that you serve, your employees, but also to the people in your program. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Alvarado, so much for sharing all of this. And let me tell y'all, I know that Dr. Alvarado practices what he preaches, because I have been under Dr. Alvarado's leadership previously. What he's sharing with you today is all that he is and all that he does. So just know that, you're hearing it from a pro.